So we survived the TikTok ban, at least for now. Just last month, TikTok went down for a mere 12 hours and creators and marketers went into a panic. Nevertheless, I brought my friend Cassie Tucker on. She's a marketing strategist and the host of one of my new favorite podcasts, Marketing Happy Hour, for a little therapy session and to talk about lessons learned about how we move forward with owning channels. Own channels are things like email lists or your website or a blog or even a podcast. These are places where we can build our brand that are not susceptible to a social media ban. Focusing on building our personal brand only on a social media platform, it's like building a house on rented land. And so we talk about some tips and tactics, some strategies about the lessons learned from the TikTok ban. I think you're going to really enjoy this episode. This is Making Varsity. Hey everybody, welcome back to Making Varsity. My name is Brad Chandler and I am here with the incomparable Cassie Tucker. She is a marketing strategist and the host of Marketing Happy Hour. Cassie, welcome.
Oh my gosh, please. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it, Brad.
And listen, in true Marketing Happy Hour fashion, which is one of my new favorite podcasts, and if you haven't subscribed to this show, make sure to do that and then go subscribe for Marketing Happy Hour. I had to bring my coffee drink for the day. This is in a Fellow mug, which Fellow, if you want to kick us some of those ad dollars, this is one of my favorite mugs ever. I think this was in your gift basket, something like this, right? When we did internship last summer.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I was like, I know that sounds familiar.
It's so the best. So Cassie, this is part lessons learned and part therapy session because we want to talk about something big that happened in the marketing and sort of creator world about a month ago, which was the TikTok ban, surviving the TikTok ban. And I wanted to bring you on because I know you have so many thoughts on this and you were like a prophet, a voice in the wilderness ahead of all of this. And for now, it only lasted for 12 hours, but I think it's definitely got some people on their heels about this concept of owned channels. And so talk to me. What were you sort of hearing, seeing, feeling in the culture, so to speak, when it comes to the TikTok ban and how we move forward?
Oh boy. So leading up to it, there was a lot of panic, right? I think all of us in the marketing space, creators, influencers, everyone's like, what's going to happen? We don't actually have all the details of exactly how this thing is going to play out. Even as we were approaching it and we knew it was happening, we didn't know how long it would last for, kind of what the implications of that was. So there was a lot of confusion around it. And I think the biggest panic when it happened and before it happened was, I'm going to lose my TikTok page. All this growth that I've built, this community that I've created on this platform, it's going to be gone. What now? And I think for me, the biggest lesson here, as I talk about a lot, like you mentioned, is just this power of diversification on social media and online, and also the power of own channels. And so I always tell brands that I work with, don't put your eggs all in one basket. I understand one platform may take off better than others, and maybe that's TikTok for you. However, it's still important to prioritize how can we drive people to our other channels, specifically own channels, where if Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever it is, decides I'm going to shut this brand's account down tomorrow, you have other legs to stand on. And so bottom line, I know we'll dive into that more in this conversation, but it's a powerful lesson. And it's unfortunate that a lot of people felt like they didn't have anything if TikTok were to shut down. But I think this is just a reminder of, okay, unfortunately that occurred. We still don't know what's going to happen with TikTok. By the way, we have about 75 days of this limbo, what's going to occur. So now is the time. Now is the time for brands. It's not too late. Let's start thinking about diversification.
I think you're 100% right. I don't think we're out of the woods on this thing yet. And I think that it should not just be one of those like, oh yeah, that was cool, meme worthy for a weekend.
Yeah.
I think it was a major wake up call. And I've even, noticed maybe even folks who aren't TikTok creators, maybe people who are on Facebook or Instagram kind of saying, haha, like TikTok, that's what it is. But it's like the reality is it can happen with any platform. I mean, maybe just speak to just the baseline risks, as it were, of kind of putting all of your eggs in one basket?
Yeah. So I think bottom line, we're talking about owned and non-owned channels. So specifically with social media, those are non-owned channels. So we do not own the platform itself.
In case you didn't know that. Right.
Yes, we do not at all. So Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, they could all step in one day and decide that you went against compliance somehow. Maybe something happened or their platform shuts down altogether. Your page is gone. That's it. And a lot of times nowadays, especially because of the lack of customer service and support that we have as brands on these pages, that's usually it. There's no getting yourself out of that. A lot of times when it's gone, it's gone. And so I think just overall remembering that social media is a very powerful thing, especially for getting new reach and new exposure to new people. But my question for brands is, how can you use that as a gateway to bring people in? But then where can you lead people next? And a lot of the times, my solution or recommendation is getting people onto your website or your email list specifically. And so there's a lot of risk there just overall. Again, social media is a beautiful thing. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of opportunity there on the pages, the channels, but I think just remembering that we do not own those platforms and anything could happen at any time. I have a friend who he had a massive Facebook group, thousands and thousands of people in this group. And Facebook decided one day that a post went against community guidelines, which there's many details to those guidelines. So who knows? You never know what could happen. And his group is gone. And so he spent years building this group out. Thankfully, he is also an email marketing expert. So he has these other channels, he has other groups and everything. And so for him, it wasn't as much of a hit. But can you imagine if that's all he had, community-based? And then it's this work of having to rebuild that group and rebuild that community. And a lot of that stuff is just lost at the end of the day.
So, in your consulting work, how do you lead clients to cross that Rubicon, so to speak, to where maybe they're over-indexing, they're over-invested in social media, and then you're leading them? Like, what's the next step? Like, what would you say they should do first in terms of investing in own channels?
Yeah. So I think the positive side, thinking about, let's say there is a brand who's built this great following on social media. Hopefully with that, they've established great trust with their community. And so it doesn't hurt I always recommend email. I think email marketing is incredibly powerful. Even to this day, the ROI, the conversion rate on the platform is absolutely amazing. And so I would say start there. If you have not invested in email marketing, go ahead and get that going. Build out some really valuable content in there. It's also a way for your consumers to go a lot deeper on your content. And so social media, again, I think is a great platform to start sparking that trust and relationship with your community, but asking your community to take that next step, and just throwing in CTAs in your social copy and your stories and everywhere, and just asking them, hey, I have even more value. If you like this post on XYZ, this topic I've created, here's my email list, or here's a lead magnet or something that I have created to go even deeper on this if you're interested. And just slowly kind of softly throwing out that CTA or call to action to your consumers. And you'll notice, again, if that trust is established on that non-owned channel, they're going to start to trickle over to that owned channel.
So have we seen the official return of email marketing? It's kind of crazy when you think about how things come full circle with this. And I think for a long time, email marketing has been underestimated. Have we, is this officially, I think it's been back for some time, but this feels like the ultimate wake-up call. Are we seeing the official return of it?
I think so. Yeah. And it's just for me, I kid you not, like I'm not just saying this stuff because I see data online or whatever. I have seen with my clients specifically that, again, conversion rates are way higher on email than they are on social. Again, I think it's a great place to deepen trust, tell a broader, bigger story. And so 1000%. And I think people are still eager to read what brands have to say. Obviously, if it's value driven and it's straight to the point of why should I open this email, and that goes into play with subject lines and all these other details. But yeah, I think for sure. Yes.
I think that's so interesting too. And I heard an entrepreneur that I really respect talk about email. And he was saying, one of my mentors was like, hey, you don't have a real business until you have an email list. It's like, well, wait a second. And this guy has like thousands of followers on, YouTube subscribers, like 7-figure business at the time. And it was like, yeah, but they didn't have an email list. It's like, you don't have a real business until you have an email list.
Mm.
And that just shook me a little bit. I was like, wow, I've got to build an email list, and just thinking through all of that. And then he said something else interesting. He was like, the power of an email list, it's not even just about the open rates.
Mm-hmm.
It's the fact that your name shows up consistently at the top of a feed. And you think about social media all the time. It's about algorithms. You know what has no algorithm? Email.
Yep.
Email has no algorithm, right? Like, I know that's kind of sounds like simple, the cookies on the bottom shelf, but when you think about it, you can send as many emails as you want. Let's not get crazy, all right? But in reality, your name pops up, and just seeing Cassie Tucker pop up in my email inbox, there's a trust built with that over time, because you are showing up authentically. And I may not open every email, but there's an awareness that comes with that. Are you seeing that with brands as well?
Yeah, I think so. I noticed a correlation specifically. So for my podcast, I have a newsletter, and I noticed that listen rates go up when I send an email out. I try to send an email every Thursday. So you mentioned consistency, which is really important. And so, yes, overall, just not only with the email content itself, but engagement driving to my website or my podcast, et cetera, I've noticed a great return on that. And I want to go back to something that you just said a minute ago about not being a real business until you have an email list.
Yeah.
I would even challenge that one step further and say that even if you're thinking about building a business, you're at the day one, very beginning stages of your brand, start an email list, because there are people out there that already care about you personally. Maybe you don't have that professional network built yet, but just starting to build in the early stages. And even if it's just as simple as taking people along for the ride of building your business and what that journey is like. And so when you have a launch to roll out there, you have a new product, a new service, you already have that great foundation of people who care and are listening and are paying attention to your journey to share that with. And so I personally do not think it is ever too early to start that.
100%. So let's start with that then. I mean, talking about an email, talking about own channels, email list. What would be the best way to build an email list? Maybe someone's listening to this and saying, okay, well, does anyone really want another email inbox in to deal with, another email in their inbox to deal with? How do I get people on this list? Like, what should I do?
Yeah. So I think first step, it goes back to foundationally, just what are you looking to provide? What is that value and that extra step of education or inspiration or motivation, whatever you're providing? And so honing that down and kind of understanding how to communicate that to the audience. So people aren't just going to sign up for your email list just because. And so you have to let them know why they should be signing up. What's in it for them? What are they going to get out of it? And so that messaging piece and kind of that strategy and focus foundationally is really important. And then in addition to that, the next step is I always recommend to people creating a resource around some sort of service or product that you provide. So whether that's, a PDF with tips on it or a worksheet or something simple that you can offer for free in exchange for an email address. And so that's a really great exchange of value that you can offer to consumers. And then the other thing too, just simply put, is talking about it consistently. I know this is something for my personal brand I don't do very well transparently, of just sharing over and over again on LinkedIn and all these other channels that, hey, make sure you sign up for this email list in order to receive XYZ every week. And so consistently sharing that out there, because most of the time too, people have to see a message or a call to action a few times before they actually act upon that. And so again, free resources are a really great way to showcase that. Make sure it's listed on your website in great spots. And then just talking about it consistently.
So can you walk me maybe through an example, and you can make it anonymous, but maybe a client or someone that you've worked with before, a brand that you worked with before, that maybe was a little skeptical about something like email marketing or an owned channel. that then invested in that and then saw a real impact, saw sales improve or saw, brand trust improve. Can you give an example of that? Just kind of put skin on that.
Yeah. So, not specifically hesitant towards email, but I think it's one of those examples of just having a well established brand and not really pouring any effort into it. So, I think for this client specifically, it's a product based business. They just didn't really have a strategy around it. They knew it was probably important, but they didn't really see the value in getting started early on. And so I came in to help build out a funnel for their B2B side of their business. And we just started simply with a welcome series. So we built out kind of this, I think it was 5 or 6 email series trickled out across a couple weeks of just explaining to the consumers who they are, what they do, what the value of working with this business is, telling a little bit of that brand story as it pertains to the consumer and why it matters to them. And then at the end of the series, we started to trickle in some soft CTAs. So kind of letting them know, hey, if you're interested, here's ways to purchase, order a wholesale bundle, whatever it is. And then at the very end of the series was our point blank, hey, purchase now. Here's the last email in the series. We hope you've enjoyed learning about us. And if you have more questions, feel free to respond and let us know. And we're happy to engage with you personally. And that welcome series did so incredibly well that we are now planning to recycle that once a year. So that's the other thing I'll recommend too, is if you create a series or sequence of emails that perform really well, don't be afraid to repeat it once a year or so. Yes, you can kind of update some of that copy, but most of the time your consumers will not remember that they received those emails a year ago. It's just not going to happen. And so don't be afraid to recycle that and re-engage your audience. But that alone, that educational welcome kind of introductory content, we got people to sign up for samples and then samples of the product. And then we were able to create another series after they received the samples to follow up with them. And just overall, I don't have the specific numbers off the top of my head, but they saw way more sales and conversions from that email series versus just basically relying on SEO traffic and social media.
Absolutely. So. I mean, are there too many emails? I mean, how much is too much?
So I feel like there's a lot of varying opinions on this. Yeah. I think it is okay personally. I would prefer to only receive maybe 3 emails or so from a brand a week. However, I have spoken to people who have said they have sent multiple emails a day, even depending on what's going on. If you have a timely event, a webinar, whatever you're trying to get people online for, that can be a little bit different. But I always recommend if you have one main update a week and then maybe a couple product or solution specific emails you want to send throughout the week, 3 is probably fine, I would say, but I think it depends on who you speak to.
So, I mean, I know connections with your community is super important. And, you kind of hear this concept of like nurturing emails. What would you say is sort of the bones of just a well-crafted nurturing email? So if branding and adding value, Gary Vaynerchuk talks about like the jab, 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 right hook, right? And so the right hook is the sale, like you said, the email at the end of that sequence that says, okay, buy this thing now. Okay, right, that's the right hook. But what do you feel like are kind of the bones of just a healthy nurturing email campaign? Like what does that look like?
Yeah, so essentially, to your point, that's a great book, by the way. So great recommendation if you have not read that. Essentially, we've made the shift in marketing, I would say, probably about 10 years ago, where you used to go on social, you used to receive every email, and every email or social post would sell to you. It was buy this, buy that. There wasn't any rhyme or reason. It was just simply, here's my product, here's a link to buy, right? Yeah. And now I think we're in this education value age. I would say about 5 years ago, the 80-20 rule came out to play, where it was 80% of the time you're adding value, you're educating, you're inspiring, entertaining, and 20% of the time you're selling, which is kind of similar to the Gary V method. And so I think now what consumer behavior tells us is that consumers are not typically going to buy a product or a service from someone unless they are referred that product or service. So a friend that they trust told them, or if they built trust with that brand specifically. And a lot of that honestly comes into play, in my opinion, with humanizing your brand as much as possible. So when I say that, it's either bringing out a spokesperson from your brand, whether it's the founder, the host of the podcast that you have for your brand, whoever it is that you can identify as that human touch that's speaking to the consumer. And that's kind of the gateway to human trust, and using that person as the point of view to write emails from, create social content. Maybe their face shows up on social media, for example. And so specifically speaking to email nurturing, a lot of emails that you should be writing are solely storytelling driven, value driven, educational driven. And so thinking about what is that main offer, that thing that you provide, what is the theme of your content, what questions do your consumers have, what are they asking around your industry, and solely just answering those questions, providing value to provide value. And chances are, if someone has built that trust with you over time because they have received so much value from you, when they think about purchasing whatever you offer, the hope is, and chances are, they will think of your brand first because they've gotten so much value out of that. But I think the human piece is something that's incredibly important too, first and foremost.
Yeah, I think that's massive. I think just not overthinking, an email strategy. I think, some of my favorite newsletters that I follow, they almost treat email marketing like a blog. Like if they have a thought about something, boom, that's an email. Or if they're in a conversation with someone, like, boom, that's an email. Like, I have one in the queue right now where I'm going to be talking about just consistency of podcasts. Like, hey, if you want to be in the top 7%, of podcasts, guess what you have to do? All you have to do is record more than 10 episodes. Like that's it. If you record more than 10 episodes, you are better than 93% of podcasts that are on the Apple Podcast platform. And so just like that's just a thought that I was having with a potential client I had in a conversation. Like, hey, you realize consistency is the most important thing when it comes to something like podcasting. Well, that's a thought that can easily be captured into email format. And it's a great example of, hey, this is free value. Hey, I was on a call recently. This is what happened. And almost treating email like blogging in some senses. And that was like a major unlock for me. Once I figured that out, I was like, oh, now I get it.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be overcomplicated. And I think, too, the biggest question you have to ask yourself, and I want to be clear, too, that email marketing, it's a lot of trial and error, right? It's trial and error with the content itself. It's testing subject lines, what gets people to open the email in the first place. And I think ultimately, the more that you show up consistently, the more you add value, the more you just serve your email list with great content. And that relatability factor too is huge, peeling back the curtain, vulnerability, etc. Over time, people will see your name pop up in their inbox and they'll automatically want to open that because they have a great experience with your brand via email week over week.
Absolutely. So I think you're an example of someone who has done an incredible job over the past few years of building your personal brand. I want to kind of pivot to that a little bit because, your focus is on a lot of these owned channels, especially your podcast, and not so much social media. I think that you're well diversified in many senses, and I'd love to for you to just talk about how has building your personal brand made a difference in your business, just personally as a creator, as a marketer, somebody that's really a voice in this community. How's building your personal brand been so important to all this?
Oh, man. Well, thank you, first of all. It's definitely a journey. I think I still have a lot of work to be done just overall, but I think the biggest thing is just going back to that consistency piece. So I've definitely been in this journey over the years of honing what I want to be known for, what my focuses are. I started my career very heavily in social media management. Now I'm very much in the podcast space and kind of the personal branding space, working with a lot of speakers and authors, et cetera. And so again, I think it's consistency of showing up. So no matter where I'm at in my journey, just making sure I'm sharing that journey, sharing what I'm learning, et cetera. And I think also just letting people know as you're pivoting, what are you doing now? Why are you doing it, et cetera. And the other thing for me too is I try not to bite off more than I can chew as much as possible. And so for me, it's honing what are those channels that I am able to show up consistently on and want to show up. Like, it brings me joy to post on LinkedIn, for example.
Yeah.
I don't find as much joy from posting on Instagram, I'm going to be honest. So it's narrowing down like what excites me, where do I want to show up, and where do I want to build community on, and making sure I'm consistent on those platforms. So it's email marketing for me, it's podcasting, and it's LinkedIn. And those are my three main focuses. Yes, you'll see me show up on other platforms, but I have made the intention that those are going to be the places that I'm going to connect with people the most.
What if I told you that your voice could be the most powerful asset in your business? And what better way to use your voice than starting a podcast? In fact, a comprehensive podcast strategy could be the missing link in your business's marketing mix. But how do you get started, and how do you make sure that it actually works? That's where my team at Made by Varsity can help. Made by Varsity is a full-service podcast agency that helps brands and entrepreneurs establish trust, build connections, and grow their business. So whether you need coaching and consulting to get set up, or you need turnkey solutions to manage and market your show from week to week, we've got you covered. Just head over to madebyvarsity.com and book a call with me today. All right, back to the episode. So I love that you mentioned podcasting. Of course, we're both podcast nerds, and we both do that in our business. And we talk to entrepreneurs, and I'm sure you run into this as well. I think a lot of entrepreneurs see podcasting as a very time-consuming effort. How do you lead them to that place where they can actually see that this platform, what we're doing here, is actually worthwhile, that it is worth the investment?
Yeah. So, it definitely is work, right? And that's why you hire people like Brad Chandler to help you out with that stuff.
Stop. But seriously, links in the description.
But bottom line, I think, and we talked a little bit about this on my show, but I think just remembering the value of podcasting. How often does a consumer decide to put their headphones on and listen to your voice for 20 plus minutes, for example? It's a very intimate platform. It's a very huge opportunity to connect and to build a relationship with your consumer, tell your story, share some of that vulnerability that we talked about a minute ago. And so I think the opportunity for that is huge, but it's also thinking about it as a macro piece of content. So you produce this podcast, hopefully on video. Highly recommend being on video if you can be. And then you're able to take that and create social media assets off of it. Or you can transcribe the podcast and turn it into a blog post or LinkedIn articles or whatever. And so it's this big piece of content that sure takes a little bit of time to think about and to produce and to record, but you've now made the other work in marketing your business so much easier. And so it's a huge asset for that reason. I think also too, it's still, even though podcasting has been around for so long, it's still a fairly new platform to a lot of people. And so I think it stands out to others, whether it's potential business partners or clients or whatever, when you do have a podcast, because people are still building familiarity with it. And so it's a great way to build your personal brand, to stand out, and just overall connect with your audience.
So if somebody's on the fence about starting their podcast, what should they do?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, again, I tell anyone who has a podcast idea, do it, try it. Yes, there are those metrics that you mentioned of people kind of starting and then deciding not to do it anymore, which is unfortunate. But I think the number one thing is just making sure that you have great foundation topic-wise and just purpose-wise to stand on. So taking some time to sit down and understand, why are you doing it? What is the purpose of the show? Who are you speaking to? What is the value that you're going to be providing to your audience over and over again? How does it fit into your bigger marketing strategy? So how are you going to use that as a funnel to other offerings that you're providing? And so I think just understanding the why behind it, and then making sure for whatever topic you are speaking on, that you have plenty of content ideas to run with in your first, 50 episodes, for example. So also taking time to sit down and have that checklist of, okay, I have a nice list of 25 plus ideas that I can start with. I'm going to start there and then build on from there. And I think too, just gaining support. If you have the financial means to get support, I think some of the production tasks can sometimes hold us creators down. We have all these ideas, we get excited about it, but it's just putting it all together that is a big question. There are a lot of steps. I'm going to be honest. So if you can get support from someone like Brad Chandler, definitely do it. And I think that just makes getting started a lot easier.
I love that. So we've talked about email. We've talked about podcasts. These are own channels. These are things where you're, creating content, producing content. What other own channels can we explore, kind of maybe build out that might protect it? And listen, by the way, I saw this meme. It was so great. It was right before the TikTok ban, and it was like, and this shows my age a little bit, but it was like everybody's freaking out about the TikTok ban, and it's like me just taking a drag from my cigar, just like remembering MySpace, just like, not my first rodeo. Zanga, rest in peace.
I know. I know.
So,
for me, it's Vine. I about had a heart attack when Vine was dropped off of our phones. I loved that platform.
So Gen Z kids, you're gonna be okay. We survived. Welcome to the other side. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what are some examples of other own channels? You mentioned websites. So like what would that look like?
Yeah. So blog content is an example of that, and there's a number of benefits for blogging, right? I mean, SEO, just additional value, backing the authority that you have in your space, et cetera. But that's one example. And then another kind of niche example too is if you were to build a custom community or custom course or whatever, you own all of that stuff as well. Course content on other platforms to an extent is owned content as well. That's obviously outside of your website. But yeah, I would say with your website specifically, it's that blog content and custom community or course content.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things, and I know they wouldn't mind me sharing too, is I've gotten a chance to work with Arma Courses, which is it's a monthly subscription courses platform for Bible and theology content. And one of the successes of the podcast that they then, launched, that I got a chance to be part of the team on, is they had a built out community that's been going on for 4 years. And when it came time to release the podcast content, which by the way, was actually a course. It was a 365-day Bible reading plan. It was a course that was released to the community first. And then what happened was they then removed it from the paywall and then made that a public podcast, which is the Bible department. And one of the things I think that helped tremendously, especially at the launch, is because there had been so much trust built with that community, with the Arma community, so that when it came time for this big launch, so to speak, they came out to the polls, so to speak, and really drove some of the early, launch of that as well. And so that was really one of my first forays into seeing the power of, like you said, custom community, whether you build that on Kajabi or Mighty Networks or whatever, and just incredibly, incredibly powerful, like watching that at play.
Yeah, absolutely. And courses are a whole nother discussion. They're just incredible overall. But yeah, there's a lot when you get a developer in your hands and you're able to kind of create this custom experience online. I mean, there's so much that you can do there, and it's all owned, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Discover Universal. This is so fun. What a cool opportunity for you. How did that happen? If you don't know, Cassie is the host of Discover Universal, which kind of explores really the Universal brand, especially around the parks. And I think that this opportunity, correct me if I'm wrong, really happened as a result of you building your personal brand. I mean, how did that happen? How did you end up on that show? What's it been like? Like, give us some insight there.
Yeah. So how it happened. So I had our producer, Michelle, on Marketing Happy Hour, I would say back in, was that 2021 or 2022? So it was a few years ago. And I simply wanted her on the show because I thought she was cool. I thought what she did was awesome. She literally created this podcast from scratch, pitched it to her team, launched it. And so we talked about that experience on my show. And the two of us really hit it off. So we essentially became friends, which has happened quite a bit with podcast guests, which is so fun. I never thought that would come from podcasting, but it truly is a testament to this network that you can build by hosting your own show. And so she and I were friends for a long time, and they ended up having a switch over in hosts, and they were casting for new hosts. And I actually received a casting notification outside of her to my email somehow. And
so she just threw your name in the bucket. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny. So I saw it and I sent her a text and I said, "Hey, I saw this casting come through. Like, do you think I should audition?" And she's like, "Yeah, of course. Absolutely." So I had to record a video, do this whole spiel and whatever, talk about Universal. And so I sent it in, not to her, but through this casting agency. And I was like, all right, whatever. Like, why not? And I ended up, getting a call about a week later, and I had to go in for an in-person audition, which was terrifying, by the way. So I had to sit down and do a pseudo fake podcast with multiple people and just test chemistry and things like that. And it ended up going well, but I left that day thinking, I'm never going to hear from these people again. Like, who knows,
Right.
And so I left, and Michelle the whole time is like, "Hey, obviously I think you're awesome, and you clearly have experience, and you've been doing podcasting for a long time, but ultimately it's a group decision and my leader has to be involved in all this stuff." And I said, "Completely understand, no pressure, whatever. Just excited to be able to audition." And so 2 months later, literally, so I'm like sitting there for 8 weeks, twiddling my thumbs, haven't heard anything. I'm like, okay, this is over. I get a phone call that I got the job, and I was in shock, in complete shock. And literally a week later was our first day of filming. And it has been such an honor. I've always been very interested in the theme park space. I love experiences, in-person experiences, and just bringing guests into a space and how do we just wow them and provide the best customer service, the best storytelling to them to engage them during their visit and bring them back in the future. It's so fascinating to me. And so to be able to be on the marketing side of things and understand how not only what launches are coming up, what parks are opening, et cetera, but how do we communicate that to an audience, especially on podcasting, in a way that's compelling and infuses all the details and answers those key questions that they have. And so it's been amazing. I go a couple times a month and record, and we're in this awesome studio, and the team is incredible, and it's been a really great experience.
I think what you mentioned right at the beginning of that is the most fascinating thing about podcasting is it actually has very little to do with views or downloads, but it's the relationships. And I think I even talked about this on my episode of Marketing Happy Hour about how it's the ultimate warm lead, right? When you reach out and you're connecting with someone, you have no idea how that can come full circle a year later to get an opportunity like that. Why? Just because you created a great experience for them to pick their brain, to add value. If for anything else, like if nothing else happened, you got to spend an hour with an expert to ask questions and tricks of the trade, but then to realize that, oh my gosh, it also can lead to a business opportunity. That is just so incredible. It's so powerful, and just kudos to you. It's just so fun to kind of see you all over the place on that. So she's the pod mother, everybody, right?
Oh my gosh,
and so
pod mother, I love that.
So here's one of the things, kind of the unique things about this show, about Making Varsity, is one of the things I like to have our guests do is they will ask a question of a future guest. All right. And then you're going to get to sort of pay it forward and ask a question of a future guest as well. So we kind of call this the Varsity Challenge. If you could go back and give young Cassie, so let's say 16 years old, young Cassie, a piece of career advice, what would you say?
Great question. Man, I think The number one thing I would say is not be afraid to speak out and ask questions, offer ideas, etc. It's really funny. I podcast for a living now, but I used to be incredibly quiet and shy. I tell the story to young professionals all the time because they're just shocked half the time I tell them this, but I used to be so afraid as to what other people thought, what my teammates thought, my leaders thought. I would be afraid I would share an idea and it would be looked upon poorly. So I think number one, just not being afraid to stand by your ideas. And I think the biggest thing for me that has helped with the confidence there is education. And when I want to share an idea, making sure I have data and details and just content to back that up. And I think also just remembering that most people aren't as critical as you are of yourself. And so just not being so afraid of what other people think. It's really, I think, just kind of silly at the end of the day, but I understand that inner voice that questions you and all of that. And so I think that's the biggest thing. Just don't be afraid to share. Don't be afraid to ask. You never know what can come from that. And I think of all of the ideas along the way that wouldn't have come into fruition. I talk about theme parks all the time. What attractions or what experiences wouldn't be a thing if that person who spearheaded that idea wouldn't have spoken up. And so there's so much that can come from what's inside of us. And so just don't be afraid to share that out there.
Absolutely. It's all those little idiosyncrasies that make us unique, that allow us to kind of carve out our own little spot, in the thing of personal branding and whatever that looks like. Podcasts are such a fun way to do that as well. Cassie, thank you so much for your support of me on this journey, kind of starting this new, this new venture. I've always sort of been in the co-hosting chair or in the production chair. And so, launching out, doing this on my own now in many ways, you were one of my first guests that I wanted to invite on here. Thank you so much just for your support on the journey. I just wanted to, personally thank you on that. So,
oh my gosh, of course. Well, thank you. I'm so glad we got to meet last summer, and I'm an avid listener of some of the shows you've been a part of in the past, and can't wait to listen to this one. So, thank you. I'm honored to be here and be a part of it.
Fired up. Any final takeaways? Any final thoughts you'd like to leave everybody?
Oh man, I would say don't wait. Get started. Build those own channels. Today is the day. Do not hesitate. Just get out there, try things, test, learn, do it.
Let's go.
Just do it.
I love it. I love it. Hey, thanks so much, Cassie. Talk to you soon. Hey fam, thanks so much for joining us on Making Varsity. If you enjoyed this week's content, make sure to tap that subscribe button, share it with a friend, and turn on your notifications so you never miss an episode. For more resources, make sure to check out the description below and feel free to drop us a comment. I love you guys, and I'll see you next time.